right.
Ram, it's so exciting to talk to you today about travel. That is a topic that's very easily exciting.
Yeah.
In fact, earlier in my career, I was on the early launch team of Hotwire.com.
Oh, cool.
So this is an area of great interest to me.
Awesome.
Let's talk about your role. You're Vice President of Global Experiences.
Yep.
And it would be wonderful to understand, how do you think about the customer journey and the user experience for many different types of users? You know, first, tell me about your role, and then I'd like to walk through a little bit about how you think about personalization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run something called Booking Experiences, which is everything other than hotels. Which is all about thinking about the assortment for travel. So making sure that when people go to a destination, they can get the right transportation, they can experience the museums or the attractions in the city, or maybe even get a table that they can book through OpenTable, which is our sister company, in terms of really reducing the friction. So we're on a long journey to make sure that we can actually recommend some interesting assortment and interesting next things to do for our customers when they're actually in destination. So which is actually pretty cool. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you're interacting with many different customers on different platforms. Yeah. Maybe they're on their mobile device. They could be logged in, or maybe you've never seen them before, or perhaps they're a repeat customer. Yeah. How do you think about each one? And what techniques, specifically machine learning techniques and others, are you utilizing in order to optimize the experience for every type of user? And related to that would be, what kinds of data do you rely on in order to do that effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. We can talk for a couple hours on this, but I'll try to hit the sort of the main points. I think when you look at Booking.com, the way we think about machine learning and AI is sort of the core of how we work. So to give you the scale, you know, we've used supervised learning for many years, a couple decades, and at this point we probably have 500 machine learning models running live in production. And you know, we can do things like, you know, hey, if a customer forgets to add their kids, you know, which is a very interesting use case that happens all the time. You're in a rush to book a room, and you know, you don't think about your children during that booking process. We have learned so much about that pattern that we can kind of, you know, reinforce that message back to our customers that it looks like you forgot your kids at different parts of the journey.
Hopefully not on the journey.
Not on the journey, that'll be too late. But yeah, during the journey process of the actual booking. So that's just one example. Another example is, you know, we use Markov chains to really figure out what is the sort of destination recommendation. And you know, there are close to 2.5 billion parameters that we use in this technique to make sure that we are very accurate about how to represent, you know, your next trip. And the reason this is important, and the bias for data and the bias for thinking about, you know, consumer thinking is much more deeper at a booking is, you know, travel happens only once. You probably may go to a destination only once, right? It's not like buying a commodity box of cereal, or, you know, just buying diapers for your kids, right? And it's okay if it's substitutable. There is only one probably museum in the world that you want to go to. It can't be substitutable. You probably will go to Amsterdam only 1 or 2 times in your life. So we have to really make sure that consumers get the best value out of it. So we're extremely careful about, you know, thinking about recommendations, thinking about how we use data. Yeah, so that's how I think about it from a broad framework.
So a year ago, my AI venture Prisma was acquired by Nielsen, and we focused a lot on search, discovery, but really personalization. And this is for digital platforms, for streaming media. So to your point, we're relying on a very different set of data, and the stakes maybe aren't as high as in online travel. And when you think about the experience, for you, you're talking about everything from the user journey all the way down to the actual travel experience on the ground. And there are so many ways in which you can provide value to the user in advance of their trip, perhaps during the booking window, also throughout the trip. How are you ensuring that you're collecting the right kinds of data, and what are the feedback loops that you've been implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So I think, as I mentioned, you know, we've been pretty focused on using data as an input to really figure out sort of how to progress during the consumer journey. But over the last few years, we've started launching a whole bunch of experiences that are not just hotels or homes or apartments. It is also about what you do in a city, the sort of the restaurant you go visit, or the going up to the Eiffel Tower, or going up to the Shard in London. And then we realized that some of those things are also an interesting decision point. Not everybody can decide to book the tickets to the Shard, you know, 45 days before, right? You probably will book your room, your flight, and 45 days before, but you may like, you know what, I'm going to put that decision about going up the tower when I go to London, right? So we're listening to those signals to think about that zero moment of truth. When do consumers actually make that decision? What sort of data is required for us to really understand that? What we felt in some of the new products that we're launching is we don't have the sort of the moat of data that we had. So we're really relying on the activity of the user to see that are they responding to a certain search query? Are they actually responding to how we change the user experience? Are they responding to the way we think about the email, the time of the email? And we're using that to learn almost near real time, which has been a very, very fascinating journey for us.
So we talk a lot about context.
Yes.
What is that moment where they make the decision, and how do you balance these trade-offs between experimentation that allows you to continually refine the experience and really optimize for every user versus deploying at scale? There's infrastructure costs, you don't want to increase latency, there's all these trade-offs. How do you think through that and prioritize it when you're trying to make these decisions about what's best for the user?
Yeah, I think one thing that we made sure is, the core business is actually highly predictable. So, when we think about experimentation tooling, and we've written a lot about it, you can actually Google us, you can see our tooling and how the work we've done there. Or when we think about how we deploy machine learning models, or the consumer journey, or how our apps respond, we're very consistent about it. Because people don't want us to change the UX overnight. We need to make sure that, we're earning the trust of our customers. So that is fairly consistent. I think where we have a little bit more flexibility is to say that when the booking is done, when they make their trip destination certain, then we can start to play around. We can start to tell them, oh, in Amsterdam, by the way, you can actually take a ground transport, or you can take a private car and driver through one of our other companies called Booking Go. Or maybe you can go up to this boat ride that usually sells out because it's very unique, and the boat operator gives you an interesting story that usually is not available in the generic boat rides, right? Those are the things we can start to test. We've also seen that the context of the user, whether the price affinity of the user, the property type they're staying in, how long they're staying for. So families of 2 children staying for 3 days versus 8 days is a night and day difference. People that are staying for 8 days usually go out for day trips, or they are very indecisive of making a decision about booking anything for the first couple of days. Or people that are staying only for 2 days want to book everything, get through the city as fast as possible. So I think it's almost impossible to generalize, is what we've learned, and I think the journey is really long to really get a sense of what these cohorts of users are.
So when you think about the attributes of the experience, so you have different types of experiences, they each have different features, and you have to weigh what attributes are most important for which type of user at what moment in that context. What have you found? What are some of the insights that you found about that? Maybe you have a solo traveler, maybe you have travelers with kids, and you know that each property has different attributes. How do you prioritize and rank which ones matter most to that user? Maybe you've seen them before, maybe you haven't. How do you think through that process, and what are some of the techniques you're using?
Yeah, I think we always start with the supply side first to make sure that we are very authentic about what the supply composition is. So we want to be very clear about what the supply is. Is it a tower? Is it a helicopter ride? Is it the Napa Valley train? Or is it something else that's interesting? And then we try to figure out what are the top 4 attributes that help make the consumer the right decision. And that takes time to build those attributes. The framework is sort of called supply liquidity in the industry. So we use a supply liquidity framework to make sure that we are constantly learning about those attributes. And then we use those attributes to really figure out, do we put them in search? Do we put them in recommendation? And how do users respond to it? So for example, families with children may want to go to a rooftop bar that's actually friendly for families, right? And we don't want to remove the rooftop bars completely, assuming that they're a family and they will never go to a rooftop bar. So it's things like that, because travel again is about that serendipity. It's about that moment of you see a big building and you're like, oh, what is it? Let me go in there. And then we want to tell them, great, go in there, put your phone away, and by the way, you can actually book a ticket right now and use your phone to get in. So we're learning that context as well, like and the movement of our travelers across the town in terms of the times of the day, in terms of how they come into the city, what mode of transport do they take. All of these are like amazing inputs for us to sort of enrich the user's journey.
So you mentioned something in there about the types of data you're collecting, but how do you make sure you don't have bias?
Ooh.
This is a big topic for those of you who've been at the diversity panels and the breakfast, and of course there's a reception this afternoon. Bias in the data and, well, bias in the algorithms. How do you make sure you're on the lookout to avoid that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. We take it very, very seriously. Over the last few months, we've actually started, so let's step back for a second. Bias is all about there's some imbalance in some of the attributes, right? Something else is off or higher or lower.
Or missing.
Yeah, or missing, and then you use that as the input set, and then out comes out different sets of results, and out comes out recommendations that you never intended to serve to your customers. So we've been spending a lot of time to make sure that how do we normalize that sample set so it's not imbalanced. So one of the techniques that we've recently used is something called inverse propensity weighting, where we're trying to really normalize essentially all of the sample sets so we can have a control group and a test group, and then we can then use that to start running further tests for our experiments. And it has actually worked out pretty well for us. And we're also having a lot of discussion with the academia to figure out how deep can we go in this area to make sure that we're learning a lot about some of the techniques that are there to really remove the bias part. So to me, it starts with the input. As long as you can, regulate the input or make sure the input is, cleaned up, you should be okay along the journey.
And of course, with the feedback loops, you're also making sure that you're testing some of this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you published any of this yet then with these partners? It'd be great to share that with the crowd.
Absolutely. There is one paper that we'll try to put as a link maybe to this conference, but it's from the KDD conference, so KDD, which is a big machine learning symposium. We've actually published a paper called 150 Techniques at Booking.com. So that's a lot for you to consume on your weekend reading, but I would highly encourage you to read that.
Or on your next flight that you booked on Booking.com.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so thank you for the plug. Yeah, but yeah, that's a really cool paper, and we've also summarized the paper as well. So there's both a shorter version plus the long form version of that over the last 15 years of the things that we have done.
So in your business, when you think about how you're optimizing for the user experience, what are some of the key metrics that you're using to make sure that you're achieving your goals?
Yeah.
And I have a secondary question here too, but I'll start there.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the cool things about Booking.com is we on the way we work is obviously very experiment and data driven and very much sort of conversion focused or outcome focused. But what's interesting is the way we build products is very much input focused. So we're constantly thinking about what inputs make up the output. So starting with the supply, is the catalog correct? Is it complete? Is it accurate? Is the right weightage? What happens to the user? Are the user coming in which channel? What's their performance? What's their dwell time? When they do a search result, are they spending a lot of time scrolling down? Are they clicking the first link and going ahead and going to the next page? So it's a collection of many metrics where really we don't look at conversion from that perspective. We're looking at really the sort of the health of the user, health of the supply, and sort of following that across the way. Because we felt like it's better to know that in more detail because otherwise we'll just have to accept consequences, right? When you only look at conversion, it only goes up or down.
Right.
It's too late to do anything. So we thought we should have a lot more control of the inputs that we can control and we can tune. So we've been heavily focused on that.
That makes a lot of sense. I saw many companies fall into the trap, at least in my business, around relying too much on the click. And because it's easy to measure and it's ubiquitous and everyone knows what a click is, but it didn't necessarily lead to a better experience, didn't lead to more engagement. And so a big part of our challenge was to develop new metrics that really explain what engagement is all about and how do you measure it in a more meaningful way over time. So when you think about the lifetime value of your user and how you're building that relationship, over time, how are you seeing that evolve? So which metrics are important early on versus later in the stage of the relationship?
Yeah, so we have a concept called customer equity, which is really a reflection of lifetime value. But in equity, you also have good customers, okay customers, and not so good customers. And you want to make sure that you're trying to excite the not so good customers or customers that are not committed to you. And of course, keep the customers that are committed to you in a much more engaged way. So we're looking at those dimensions in terms of really make sure that equity towards the platform is actually going ahead or moving ahead. So what we've learned in the customer equity project is that looking at tests and looking at behavior of the user over multiple months to a year is what's required. Of course, we're not a high-frequency e-commerce company where people come to us like 5 times a week. People do travel, but not as much as they would probably go to an e-commerce site. So we really need to make sure that we're getting a lot more signals, even when people don't travel, right? And when people do travel. So we're collecting all of those signals to really figure out, what's that equity? Is it just engagement? Is it contribution to content? Is it an actual transaction? Or are they canceling because they're unhappy? Or was the CS call volume, much more than the threshold that we expect? Or were the self-serve tools that we have, for example, we have a chat that you can actually directly converse with. It's topic detection chat that talks to you, and you can also talk to the property as well directly. And we look at that as very, very closely. And the last thing is we're very, very global. So we have, insane amount of languages that we support, including customer service. So that's another learning. And we've learned that to be quite interesting because the way consumers think about, self-service in non-English languages is very different than how, we're probably perceived in the US.
Say more there. Maybe people in the audience don't understand some of the implications of localization and having to run a global platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing is, it starts with just the detail page and search, right? Almost everything, at least we're all used to just looking at, English-based, search results, English-based, detail pages, and you realize that the intent of the user in different languages is very, very different and very unique compared to just one primary language. This problem would have been the same. It was just a French company, and then we're trying to, accommodate other languages. So it's not necessarily exclusive to us. But when you start doing something like an autocomplete, and you do it in a very different language that we don't have enough history and enough feedback loops on that, we may not give you the right result, right? And the self-serve tools may have very different consequences about, what consumers expect. So it's an amazing and fascinating world. The moment you have such an explosion of languages, and we support 200 countries in terms of where we do business, so which makes it also very interesting.
So you've been offering homes for rent on these vacations since the early 2000s. You've partnered with a variety of partners, including Priceline and others, to offer packages and other sorts of special features. What are some of the offerings that you've released that are based on customer demand? Learning from your users and understanding what do they need, what do they want, and how you continually provide what is important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Our home business is really a reflection of customer demand, and it grew organically over time. We've been in the home business for a very, very long time, like you said, from the early 2000s. But we've also grown that business very rapidly based on what customers are telling us, including the types of properties, including the capabilities that are required by the host, including the convenience of connecting that to the other parts of the business. So that's been fascinating. What we also learned is in terms of activities and tours and experiences that customers want. And it's pretty interesting that almost all of our customers do want the most popular activities in a destination, but they want more, obviously. But they definitely do want to go to the Alcatraz here, or go visit the Golden Gate, or the zoo or whatnot. But that's one thing that we learned, that we should not make a choice for the customer. Let the customers make sure that they don't want it. Let's make sure that we always have a selection that is bookable, available. And that's been a really amazing lesson for us, that let's be very broad and inclusive of consumer needs. And consumers will tell us over time where is the their interest from their side, or what matters to them depending on who they are.
So there's explicit but implicit preferences.
Yes.
So what techniques do you use to extract implicit preferences?
Yeah, so variety of techniques. So one of the things that we've been very fortunate is to start looking at amazing set of customer service data, reviews, and or query volume that comes in through search.
Are you using NLP? Are you?
Yeah, so NLP is bread and butter of what we do. Like I said, we also use Markov chains very, very diligently. We're now moving from supervised learning to unsupervised learning. NLP is the heart of what we do. In fact, if you look at our reviews, we have obviously millions of reviews, but we're also deriving a lot of value in terms of you being able to make a decision. Because reviews are interesting, but they're not interesting unless we talk to you about who you are, right? So if it's a family that's looking for a pool in the property, unless we tell you the pool is good, you probably will not care that we have 10,000 reviews of 5-star. That's sort of meaningless to you. So we're really trying to make sure that we have a sense of decision making that makes it easier for the customers. So that we're constantly thinking about, hey, how do we reduce their friction? Everything about travel is always, also a little bit more scary, because when you're going to a new country the first time, you don't know if your card's going to work, your phone's going to work, who will pick you up, what time of the day are you going to get there? So that's the part where we think that we can have a big role to play and sort of bring that responsibility in.
Excellent, thank you. So we have time for one question. If anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please feel free. It can also be about travel. But yeah, I can't quite see, but I know we have a microphone out there, so I'm not sure. Is anyone raising their hand? I always have more questions for you, so don't worry.
We completely wowed the audience. They're speechless.
Okay, well, good. I have one more question.
Please.
I'm very curious about some of the insights that you've learned over the course of the last few years in your role. What surprised you? What was a customer insight that possibly you didn't expect and that you've hopefully in some way incorporated into experiences? Yeah,
I think I've been obviously in the non-travel world for a very, very long time. And I learned a lot about e-commerce and e-commerce funnels, particularly a lot around discovery and recommendations and search, and things like reviews and whatnot. But I basically, my whole world was built around substitution and abundant inventory, right? And I came to travel and I realized that
you were at Amazon, right?
Yeah, exactly. Amazon and Flipkart, right? And I was like, okay, we'll always figure out, we'll buy more, we'll open more warehouses, we'll have more availability, we'll ship things faster, or whatever. But then I realized the moment you come to travel, you have none of those choices, because there's probably only one museum that is called that. There's only one Metropolitan Museum. There's only one Rijksmuseum. So you can't really substitute it. So you have to work with the availability of it. You have to figure out how you work with those providers so that they can come in through your platform in a very systematic way that customers can understand. So that has been my biggest insight. So I spent a lot of time over the last few years, or at least the last couple of years, to really think about how do we bring partners along this journey. So the travel partners are, I don't mean the hotel properties that are actually in a good place, but the experience providers are still very emerging in terms of technology.
Absolutely, and inconsistent.
And yeah, exactly. So we're trying to help them and really make sure that we bring them along the journey. So as they come along the journey, they can also render great customer experience, and which is good for them and good for us. So that's been a big surprise for me.
Wonderful. Well, such a joy to talk to you, especially about travel. In the summertime, it's hard not to think about travel.
Yes.
So I'll definitely check out your offering and book another trip on Booking.com.
Yeah.
And really look forward to seeing what else you do with the experiments that you've been running. So
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.